Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Wantrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofrumento. If you've ever walked around modern cities or wherever it is that you live and you think to yourself, are current day buildings, are new buildings as good as the old ones? You probably have come to the conclusion that not necessarily. And that's why I'm so grateful that there are so many brilliant minds and innovators and entrepreneurs out there tackling that very societal dilemma and being part of the solution. And that's why I'm so excited about today's interview and our fellow entrepreneur, because we're all going to learn from somebody who is so strategic and intentional in the way that she thinks, and especially how she brings her entire career background into what she does today. So let me introduce you to today's guest. Her name is Chippy Morina-Stark. Chippy is a mechanical engineer from Kosovo with over a decade of experience in New York City, specializing in building systems and sustainability. Her work focuses on energy performance, regulatory compliance, and environmental, social, and governance-driven planning, helping building owners and operators navigate complex technical and regulatory environments. She's also a founder and co-founder of multiple companies that have generated over $3 million in revenue, where she's focused on scaling practical, data-driven approaches to building performance and decarbonization. Today, Chippy works at the intersection of energy, compliance, and sustainability, supporting buildings across the United States in meeting local laws while improving overall performance. She's also developing a platform to streamline building data, compliance, and performance tracking, giving owners and operators a clearer, ongoing view of their assets while continuing to advise and support growth within the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing space. I'm so excited about this interview, so let's dive straight into my conversation with Chippy Morina-Stark. All right, Chippy, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Hi, Brian. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm so excited to tap into that mind of yours because you have so much incredible experience, and I love the fact that it's all culminated into an entrepreneurial journey where you get to make a difference in so many different ways. But before we geek out about that stuff, you've got to take us beyond the bio. Who's Chippy? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Oh, man. I don't know. Just a girl who was good at math, good at physics, decided to do something with that. And that's how I became a mechanical engineer. That's how I moved to the States to do, great things. I thought at the time, I don't know if they're so great right now, but I get to work with great projects. So there's some greatness to it. And more than that, I suppose I am also a mom and a wife and a daughter. And I carry all those legacies with me every day.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. You and I obviously bonded off air with regards to our roots in the Balkans, which is important to the way that both you and I see the world. And for me, one of the most fun experiences that I have as the host of this show is immigrant entrepreneur stories, because I think that there's so much hustle, there's so much determination and grit and resilience. I'm going to put that into there. You and I bonded about having grandmothers who are way tougher than our generation will ever understand. And so, Chippy, I'd love to get that side of your personal story as well, leading into what's been an incredible career, and then we're definitely going to hone in on that entrepreneurial journey as well.
Interesting that you mentioned that. I actually saw recently some VC companies that are backing people or entrepreneurs actually that have childhood trauma. And at first, that sounded a little bit, I don't know, funny, I guess is the word to me. I said, what's about those people that makes great entrepreneurs out of them? And then if I reflect back on my career, everything that I have done is just tied to persistence, is tied to this challenge is very easy compared to what my grandparents have been through, what my parents have been through, what I personally have been through. I was born and raised in Kosovo. I moved here at the age of 22. So, and while I carry that story with me, it just trickles down into my entrepreneurial activities, I suppose, because there's just this mentality that there's nothing that can stop you, and that you have to achieve a lot to make up for everything that you have lost in the past or now or whenever, or that you're going to lose. So there's always just some sort of a loss mentality on the way, but also persistence.
Yeah, so well said. And I'm going to put that on the spotlight because having your career background as a mechanical engineer, I will say as someone who interviews entrepreneurs for a living that, Chippy, we don't often come across mechanical engineers who say, I don't just love engineering, I also want to be a business owner. I also want to be a founder, because when you become an entrepreneur and a founder, you no longer just get to do the thing. You no longer just get to do mechanical engineering. When in your journey did you realize, hey, I love this and I've built an incredible career, and you've been wildly successful in the projects that you've worked on, but you took on an even bigger challenge of starting a business as well? What did that decision point look like, and what has that journey been like since then?
It was almost predetermined. When I think leadership comes, you either have it or you don't. And so I found myself throughout my career very frustrated at the way that my leaders were, I suppose, carrying at times. Not to say that they were all, not doing the right thing. They were probably doing the right thing, but I thought I could do better. So there was that aspect. And then my dad, he always spoke about business and entrepreneurial things, and he just has carried professions from teacher and journalist to a factory owner. So seeing him, being exposed to that at every dinner that we've had, like at the dinner table, every conversation was always about business and what does it mean to be a business leader and what does it mean to have your own business. And I always just idolized that, because I always also saw how his quality of life was just severely improved by just being his own boss, I suppose. And then I dived into it and I realized it's not that glorified as he made it seem, or as I had thought it would be, because you don't get to be an engineer anymore. You don't get to do the things that you love to do. Instead, you're going to wear just so many hats along the way. And a lot of those hats you're not very good at. And so you just sort of, I guess, in the process, you have to fake it till you make it, or fake it until you get enough revenue so that you can hire more people that can wear the hats that you don't know how to perform.
Yeah, Chippy, I love the way that you articulate that, because that's the real stuff. And for a lot of people, when they think about becoming an entrepreneur, this is the stuff that they probably don't realize on the surface level. And so I feel like step one of people thinking they want to be an entrepreneur is thinking that it's about money, but you quickly realize you work way more. You wear so many more hats that you already talked about, hats that you have no idea how to wear. And you probably make less right out of the gates when it comes to starting your first business. And so for people who do think that I'm just going to start my own business because it's going to lead to all of this money, can that happen? Sure, but I think it's rooted in wanting to make a difference. It's rooted in solving real life problems. It's rooted in unleashing our talents in ways that serve others. And that's what I love about your story, is that as a mechanical engineer, you can't help yourself but walk around and look at buildings and ask, how do we make this stuff better? Even your entrepreneurial spark was, even in my job function, how do I make this stuff better? So I appreciate that sort of drive. Talk to us about when you look at the state of the world today, the state of buildings today, what is it that drives you to be part of that solution instead of, Chippy, a lot of people notice it, but not everybody wants to be that solution. Talk to us about that drive.
I think I'm going to bring into this again my childhood trauma. So I went through war when I was a kid, and at that I saw a lot of cracks in how the world operates, and there was always just this determination to make the world a better place in one way or another. And once I had my career set up, I realized that there's ways that I can make the world a better place, and not necessarily in the ways that I thought I would as a kid, like being a doctor or something like that. Instead, it would be by reducing carbon emission and hopefully try to, prevent climate change from happening, or I guess stop it to a certain degree. And so it kind of came organically, because how I was exposed to, my job started in MEP, and then as a designer, I was exposed to buildings a lot. I was just in basements every day. Just exploring building systems. And then once I did that, I just sort of realized that, yes, as an MEP engineer, what you do is you focus a lot on safety and health and occupant comfort, but you don't really focus more on what the world looks like. So you're focusing on the building, not necessarily like the entire space, the entire environment where the buildings lay. And I saw like an inn, and so I took it. And then that just trickled into my entrepreneurship journey, which started actually after I gave birth to my daughter. And I realized that, hey, if I become an entrepreneur, I'll have so much more time, and I can just, be a mom and also a business owner, which that wasn't true at all. But here we are.
I love that. Chippy, I remember once talking to a group of entrepreneurs actually in Eastern Europe, and one of the women raised their hand and she said, well, I haven't started my business yet because I'm a mom. And so then I asked the room, is there anybody else in the room that is a mom? And one woman raised her hand, and I said, why did you start your business? And she said, because I'm a mom. And so I think that it's really all about the stories that we tell ourselves. And I so appreciate and admire that side of your journey, because that is no easy feat. Speaking of wearing multiple hats at once, what has that looked like? Because at this point, you have multiple businesses inside of your entrepreneurial ecosystem and portfolio. So what does that balance look like with regards to time and the important roles that you play across the board?
It wasn't something that I knew how to navigate from the get-go. It took a lot of organizing, meaning inside my brain. I had to organize all of those tasks, and also it took a lot of shifting through priorities and just really understanding and being aware of what my priorities are, where they lay. And so really, I have my daughter, for most of the week. I take care of her while also running the business. But what that means is that I do a lot of late nights. I do a lot of early mornings. And then, of course, I have days where I'm in the office all day. And so I take those opportunities. And whenever there's my husband, he's available, then I take that as an in for me to go and just do my work. But generally it's messy. It's not a clean cut, okay, you do this and then you get to do that. And also I just don't want to be, I want, so in the future, if my daughter listens to one of these things, I want her to listen to it and say, yes, my mom did both, but she didn't neglect me. Because I think there's a lot of talk about women before us who were moms, and they carry that and they say, yes, I'm a mom, I have 4 kids, 5 kids, but I'm also a CEO and I just run the world, etc. And then you see gaps in the connection that they have with their children, and that is a priority to me. My connection with my daughter is my priority, and then everything else is just in the background, so to speak. So I want her to know that you can do both, actually, and you can do both really well if you just dedicate your time to those things, and if you just realize that your priority is your family, or at least for me, my priority is my family, and how I get to maintain my family happy financially is through my job or through my companies, which also fulfill that gap of importance through being somebody other than just a parent.
Yeah, so well said. It's that and thinking that pops up so frequently in the successful entrepreneurs that I get to interview on this show of, well, 2 things can be true at once. And that's why I love the quote. I always botch this quote, but it's something along the lines of the mark of a wise mind is the ability to hold 2 conflicting ideas at once and still stay sane. And I think that it's so important for us to recognize, you called it out, is that it's not always pretty. It's not always organized.
I didn't say that.
But I think that it's really important to understand that all of these things can be true simultaneously, because as business owners, even if someone's not a parent, they probably experience that at that same level of, oh my gosh, this feels completely out of whack, this feels completely disorganized. And I can still step into that executive role, and I can still be the leader that I want to become. And Chippy, I'm going to put you on the spot for the context of your work right now as well, because part of the work that you do through your businesses is turning chaos and complexity into simplicity, into action. And of course, we throw around that word data all the time in the business world. Everyone talks about how we should pay attention to data. It's at the crux of what you are really good at in what you do for your clients and the companies and the buildings that you work with. What does data mean to you? Because I do feel like it's become such a big buzzword that we forget, what is data? How do we interpret it? How do we actually make it actionable in our businesses?
The best way to describe it is as a human, when you go to the doctor and you ask for a full checkup, you say, for whatever reason, you get all of these test results, and some of them you understand, some of them you don't, but there's just pages of, of data. And that's just information about your system, about your body, where it lies, what does it mean? And then you go back to the doctor and you say, well, what does this all mean? And they're like, okay, you're fine, doesn't look right, but it's likely fine. So what we are doing is we're taking these buildings, and New York City buildings, we're dealing with ancient buildings, ancient systems, which have had some repair here, some repair there, and I'm talking about a lot of them have cosmetic repairs or upgrades, which is kind of like taking an old lady and putting Botox all over. And so you're like, okay, well, let me look at your building. And you take out all of those pages of information on the building, and you say, okay, well, this is what you should be doing, and this is where you are, this is what you should be doing, this is where you need to be, and this is how you're going to get there. And we're going to make you, from a 70-year-old lady, we're going to make you into like a nice 22-year-old. And that's what we aim to do. That's not, I wish it was as easy as this. I wish, our clients were as financially backed to take on these projects and to say, yes, I want to be a 22-year-old woman because, that's better for the world and that's better for me. But it's not as simple. There's financial constraints. There are, physical constraints. A lot of these buildings are historic buildings too. So there's that component. There are just other, tenants, there are leases, lease agreements, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I can go on forever on what are the constraints or why we are not getting there. But I guess the point that where we are now is getting these buildings as good as possible with time. So it's like a slow process. We're gonna make them young and better, but it's gonna take time.
Hearing the way you talk about that, it makes me realize a very real human experience, but also a very real entrepreneurial experience, is that we want it all, and we certainly wish that we could have it all, but constraints are a real thing in any circumstance, whether it's time, whether it's money, whether it's resources, there's so many different constraints that you've alluded to. And so my question to you, entrepreneur to entrepreneurs, what does that look like for you to navigate those real life constraints with your clients, knowing full well, and I think that this will put it into context for all of us in our own businesses and in our own industries, is that I would imagine when you sit down with your clients and with building owners and operators that, yeah, they want the same things that you want. Of course, we all want these good things, but how do you prioritize and balance? Again, we come back to balance, which I feel like to some degree, Chippy, with your humility or not, you have absolutely mastered it, or at least navigated it in so many different capacities. So what does it look like to sit down with clients and present, here's what we all want, here's the real life constraints. What does it look like to put that plan together based in that reality that you work in?
Thanks for that, for the balanced compliment. I like that. I strive to be as balanced as possible. What does it look like? I think there's certain maturity that comes with, I suppose, with experience in life, experience in engineering, experience in just knowing what the client wants. So you have to prioritize their wants, and then you have to balance that with their needs, because the client may want certain things, but what they need is to comply with the law. Otherwise, they're going to get fined a lot of money. But then they also might not even need to comply with the law. They might need to do these changes because their building is falling apart, or part of their system is falling apart, or their consumption is very high, or there's just so many needs that a building may have, but then the client may want something else. And so I think it comes to maturity, and it comes to, again, prioritizing, knowing what the priorities should be. So I could go into detail on how this looks like for a building where we develop different plans. We develop plans on, this is going to reduce your carbon emission the most, but then this is going to get your money back the fastest, or multiple measures, what we call them, measures at once, for example. So we create different plans, and then we see what speaks to them as well. And it's also just in a matter of making your clients understand what we are doing here. It's about introduction to their building in a way that they actually get it and they can empathize with the system or with the process, instead of just, this is the ESG of this is this, and like that's what we're doing. Instead of dealing with that, it's more explaining. I think the human component, it's the connection, basically.
I'd actually love to go deeper there with you, Chippy, because hearing the way you talk about that, I love the concept of the paradox of choice. Is that economists have studied for a long time, and they've done experiments inside of grocery stores where if I only give you 3 different choices of jam, well, I'm going to go for sheepak every single time, but if I only give you 3 choices of jam, then you are inevitably going to pick one of the 3 because that's an easy decision set to choose from. Whereas they've studied when we give people 50 different choices of jam, they stop buying jam altogether because it's too much of a decision. And I would imagine, hearing the way that you lay that out, marketers always use the analogy of TV sizes, is that when we walk into Best Buy, they so strategically align the TVs in a certain way so that you look at the 42-inch TV and you think to yourself, well, that's nice and it's only a few $100, but man, the 65-inch is really only $100 more. And so there's so many different variations that we are considering all simultaneously. What does that look like? What's your thought process in order to put these very balanced and different approaches in front of your clients? Because there's so much to consider. All these constraints that you already talked about, all the outcomes that we hopefully get, we can't have it all at once. So what is the intentional and strategic thought process that you give so that you avoid the paradox of choice and help people move in that right direction?
Like I said, I think I mentioned that I grouped them. I tried to group them into 3 different categories. But most importantly, I think being a consultant in the ESG space just gives you sort of, there's that immediate trust from your clients because they understand that you don't have a stake in the measures that they take in the building. So I have no business with how the construction, not how the construction, but what the construction is going to cost or who is it going to be performed by, which means that I'm a very neutral party between them and usually a jurisdiction. Usually, but that not necessarily. There are a lot of clients that we work with that want to do things voluntarily. So I group them into 3 categories and I try to simplify them as much as possible. And I have been thinking about that a lot, actually, because it's not just the categories. Everything about buildings is messy. You have one consultant one year, another consultant another year. They create 2 different type of reports. No one's looking at those reports. They get thrown in the trash, and then the 3rd consultant gets hired again. So I have been looking about all of this. And that's why I'm trying to build a platform that is going to bring everything together and is going to make it very simple and easy for everybody, not just clients, but for building managers, for property managers, for building engineers, and for consultants too, to have the whole view of a building and to actually see what matters most, but data backed, I guess, information backed. And then you have the conversations as well. But I think that's what we're missing. That's the gap that we have, is that the clients still are confused.
Yeah, and it makes sense, and that's true across so many industries. Chippy, I don't know if this is the right point for me to inject this or not, but it tends to get injected into every conversation these days of hot topic. Obviously, everyone wants to talk about it, is AI. And AI is unlocking so many possibilities for us to make sense of a world that is chaotic, that is complex. So how's AI factoring into all of this type of work that you do? And I'll put it in 2 ways. One, on your client side, on the actual projects themselves. And then, of course, for you internally as an entrepreneur within your businesses, how is AI changing or impacting the game?
I mean, profoundly. I wish it didn't. It is a little bit scary to think about it, to think about the future of what AI could mean in the future, but it has changed it profoundly because now you have the capability of grouping all of that information that I just spoke about, that I'm saying that's what causes confusion between all of the parties involved within a building. It has created the possibility to gather all of that information and study it piece by piece, or just compartmentalize it, do whatever you want it to do, but basically simplify it enough so that you can understand it. So I think in terms of the building and environment space, is just easier to see the big picture, to recline and actually understand what you're looking at. Just like when you're looking at a high-rise building and you're walking, you're on the sidewalk, you're not going to notice that it's a high-rise building. And this is kind of giving you like that zoomed out vision of your own assets. So, and it's actually done through AI. You don't need, piles of documents anymore and people to sift through them, and Excel sheets based on just people's personal experience or knowledges, or procedures that a company may carry or something like that. You can actually generalize everything and standardize everything now, and it is possible because of AI. And I think that's how it affects my space, my profession. How it affects me, I don't know. I haven't thought about that, I guess.
Well, you've got a lot on your plate as it is, so I would imagine that in balancing all of these things and looking at that future state, there's so much for you to measure up and really gauge when's the right time to implement it. Because here's the thing is, I feel like too many people are rushing to force AI into a lot of scenarios, and it's cool to hear that you're very aware of how it factors into your industry's work, but also cool to hear about the fact that you're leveraging your career expertise that you've amassed up to this point, and that remains your true asset there and something that you bring to the table to help so many other people. So, Chippy, I told you before we hit record that time would fly by together, but I want to squeeze 2 more questions in because I always enjoy hearing from people in your space where you've taken this incredibly successful career that you have gone into, obviously being a mechanical engineer, to now being an entrepreneur. Obviously, you and I have talked a little bit about how that differs and the many different hats that you have to wear, but what's one of those things that has absolutely surprised you along the way about the entrepreneurial journey? Knowing that you've been surrounded by business for your entire life, of course, what's one of those things that you may not have realized when you started your first business, but now you reflect on it and you go, wow, I really didn't expect that?
I don't know why my mind goes here, but I guess I'm just gonna, this is my truth. I didn't expect finances to be so tricky. I didn't expect that they not just would be so tricky, but they are emotionally tricky. And I didn't expect the emotional weight of the finances of the business. And what comes with that is, I guess, the end result is that it all depends on you or the person who's doing the business development. And I think I didn't expect that. I didn't think about that. As I thought about it, I didn't expect the emotional portion of it.
Yeah, and that's why, truth be told, Chippy, it's why I'm so grateful for amazing guests like you coming on, because these are the things. We spend so much time focused on strategy and on tactics when we think about our businesses, but that's the real stuff. And I would actually argue that it's the emotional side that is the hardest part about entrepreneurship. And if you ignore it, you're probably not going to be an entrepreneur for very long. So I'm really grateful for you publicly calling that out here during our conversation. I'm so excited to see how you answer this final question because it's super broad. You can take it in any direction you want, and that is, what's your best piece of advice for listeners? Knowing that we're being listened to by both wantrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, and knowing that you are one of us, you're a fellow entrepreneur, what's that one thing you want to leave them with today?
So I grew up with, like I said, my dad is just somebody who knows a lot about a lot. And if I ever was frustrated and I said, I'm going to fail this exam or something like that, and he would just look at me and say, yes, you are, because that's how you're thinking. And I hated that. I was like, I need more information. Like, I was an engineer, I guess, in thought even then, even before I became, officially an engineer. I needed explanation. And I think there's enough data, there comes that word again, there's enough information now, there's enough scientific backing now to make you understand that it is your thought that leads the process. And if you are able to strip away your thoughts about who you want to be, about taking that leap of faith, I guess that's the correct word, actually, I never thought about it. It's a leap of faith in trusting that everything is going to go how you want it to go, then that's it. That's all there is. You just have to stop being afraid. You have to strip away your thoughts from every possible fear that you may have that is stopping you, that is blocking you, and then you have to jump into that and then do it. And then the challenges that come along the way, just have the mentality that, challenges are good for me. There's nothing that can stop me. Have the mentality of an Albanian grandmother and just proceed, and guess what? You're going to make it. All there is hard work.
Yes, so well said. Chippy, I so appreciate that advice that you've shared with our audience. And I'm also so appreciative of all the insights that you shared, not only in today's conversation, but I'm going to call out as someone who follows you on LinkedIn that I also appreciate how generously and openly and transparently you share your thoughts about your industry, about your work, about what all of this stuff means as we move forward to a better tomorrow, not on a small scale, but literally. I love how much you think about in a societal, on a more macro scale. I'm so appreciative that there are entrepreneurs like you that are out there as part of the solution. So for listeners who want to find all this meaningful and important work that you're doing, drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
I don't know. Do you want to follow me on LinkedIn, I guess?
Chippy, I'll advocate for that for all of our worldwide listeners. That as someone who does follow you, listeners, you already know the drill. We're linking directly to Chippy's personal LinkedIn profile, where she is so active in sharing so many of these things that we talked about today, meaningful, important, and impactful work. So she's such a shining example in so many ways for all of us entrepreneurs in our own industries. So listeners, don't be shy in checking out that link down below in the show notes. Otherwise, Chippy, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for giving me the space to talk about things that I'm very passionate about beyond just sustainability.